Thank you for joining me. This is the Bold Lines podcast, and I am your host, Travis Thompson. Today, we're going to be talking about how social media keeps us childish. This is an interesting topic we have today, one that I hope doesn't make me sound too, well, how do I put it, old? Let's go with old. I don't want to sound too much like I'm someone who is hating on what the young people like. The hope here today is that I am able to express some of the interesting trends that we see in social media and people's behavior. Now, a lot of this stuff I deal with. I'm not going to stand on some ivory tower and pretend like social media isn't an issue for me or I've achieved some holier-than-thou status. But let's get into all of this. So social media has had an interesting rise since its beginning. Social media took some very basic forms early on. It used to be not anything like what we saw today. The early forms of social media took place on websites like MySpace. The basic idea of MySpace was to personalize your own profile, to connect with people in some way, but to express yourself. Over time, though, social media, along with a rise in technological advances, ended up progressing and evolving and gaining more ground. As social media has developed, it can be seen as a good thing, a neutral thing, or a net negative thing. This point of view very much depends on what your preconceived notions of it are, as well as what information you use to make your decision. In the past, social media was only on a computer. Before we had such widespread access to the internet, actually in our hands, it was just something that you connected to now and again. I still remember the family computer portion of history where instead of everyone having access to information across the world, there was a singular device that everyone in the home used to connect to the internet. We moved over time from general updates and connections with friends into cell phones. Again, one of those topics that people get really upset about, and there's varying opinions. Here's what matters in social media. Phones made social media more accessible. And with that higher level of accessibility, there's more time spent on it. I hope that's not a new revelation to anybody. If it's easier to access, you're going to use it more. However, social media took an interesting turn, and I think it engaged in something that was very well managed later on by higher tech companies or invested interests. So instead of social media just being a place where you engage with people, it moved to where you can also engage in ideas. Now, why is that? People will stay connected with friends. That's pretty much a given. It's what a lot of Facebook has ended up as. But instead of just focusing on thoughts of yourself or checking in with others, social media has been a way to engage in the world at large. It's a place where now, no matter where you are on the planet, you can get almost real-time updates on things like mass casualties, natural disasters, forums, and information releases from healthcare companies and hospitals. Now, there's a constant flow of information. This higher level of engagement on the surface sounds great. Wouldn't it be better to be more informed on what's going on? As anyone who's on social media can tell you, the internet's really not the best place for a, let's just say, qualified point of view to get attention. Social media ends up being a place where the loudest voices are the ones that are valued. This move from updates and connections with friends and family moved into a very integrated part of people's daily living. In my own business, I'm a therapist, I write books, and I run this podcast. And one of the ways that I drive people to it is through social media. And looking at social media is something that can be very tempting to stay on for a long period of time. Of course, I could rationalize it easily. It drives business, of course. But I have to admit that just looking at things like Twitter or X can drive me away from the purpose that I rationalize to myself. So I know I'm not in the minority here when I say social media can be tempting multiple times in the day. If we wanted to just engage in it, if we wanted to all of a sudden care about all these causes, we could do so very haphazardly, but we could. Social media is also a place where we can relate to those around us in a good way, in a bad way, in a very neutral way. It's a place where we can find community in one way or another. Now, some of those communities can be helpful and some of them can be incredibly toxic. However, it's very obvious that social media is a way that people find connection. There's also something really important to point out about social media and how it makes us childish. There are huge generational differences in at least the ideas of social media. However, if you go out in public, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference in how people engage in their phones and on social media. The complaints seem to be different and they seem to be more directed, but how people use them is pretty much the same. Here's also something important in generational differences. My generation was the last one to really see the transition from a lack of integrated social media and its evolution and involvement in daily living. I still remember the times that you would go and hang out with friends, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be connected. You would have no idea what was going on. However, in recent years and working with clients that are teenagers or even a little bit younger than that, some of the jokes that I would make to people that would land with adults and people would find funny, teenagers just don't get. One of the jokes that most people that are a little bit older would remember is, "Oh, I have a girlfriend. She just goes to a different school." And anybody who's older that hears that is going to laugh. I used that joke on someone who was a teenager, and he kind of looked at me funny. I realized in that moment that young people's lives are more integrated than we could ever imagine. So this is crazy to sit and think about, but young people don't know a difference between the online life and the real life, which is really odd. And again, you could argue one way or the other, but they just don't know the difference. And you can't make the argument, well, that's just because they're dumb. They might just be ignorant because that's what's offered to them. They don't know the alternative. And so with this younger generation, and I would argue it bleeds into the older generations as well, people have become over-connected. What was originally just something that we could sort of get an idea around, something that was newsworthy, that we could talk about with our close circle of friends or family, has become something that has been integrated into every part of our lives. Now, instead of just seeing social media as a way to connect, it's a way to engage in social rules and avoid stigma. It's how people position themselves emotionally. It's how they start to assert their air of superiority or virtue. The best way that I've come up to describe all of this is it's like if all of the people in the high school cafeteria never left. It's an online version of the high school cafeteria with different cliques and groups. And I get it, there's a little bit of a movie trope in all of this, but I'm pretty sure everyone that's been to a public and even a private school can understand that that feeling of walking in the room and having distinct groups with distinct rules and social settings and expectations, it's like that online. However, there's an added level to this, and this is where I think this whole childish thing comes from. We're more interconnected, and it's like an online high school cafeteria with some sort of veil of protection. Now, does social media actually protect you? No. And I'm not going to get into all of the little details of people being in danger because of social media, but there's this idea that things said online don't have real consequences, or the ones that they do are very minimal. And so you have a high school cafeteria with little to no consequences in what you say or believe. And while we can assume some level of anonymity if we were to comment on news articles or something of the sort, it's not totally anonymous, and people take advantage of that. Whether they do it directly or indirectly, it becomes incredibly obvious that people who speak on social media as if they're spouting absolute truth are doing so behind the veil of a screen. Here's the first really big point when it comes to social media keeping us childish. We've established that it's a high school cafeteria with little to no consequences. We don't have to grow up. We don't have to experience backlash. We don't have to experience stigma. We don't have to even experience making a coherent argument or aligning all of our values in the same direction, because there are other people who would like that lack of accountability. It's intoxicating. It becomes very easy to use social media as a way to express opinions, express views that might not be accepted in the mainstream, but it really doesn't matter because we have all of these other people that seem to agree with us. There was a study that I was told about in grad school, and I should probably go back and find it. But in grad school, I had a professor tell me about social expectations and emotional maturity in college. And one of the things that he pointed out was that high schoolers that move into college have the emotional maturity of a 14-year-old. Anyone who has interacted with someone who is 18 years old can tell you, yeah, that's probably true. Is that all because of social media? No. But what incentive is there to grow up on social media? You could have a whole bunch of people who never grew up. And I know, of course, this is going to jump into well, that's obviously this group. Oh, this is every group. You go online and it's a rarity to find people who have rational discussion. I talked about being on Twitter to help promote this podcast and other things. My goodness, that place is wild. There's a whole bunch of children in the bodies of adults arguing about how they're right. And are they going to prove they're right? No, you should just believe them. Interestingly enough, Twitter isn't the only place that has this problem. One of the big social media platforms, especially for young people, is Snapchat. I talked before about lack of consequences. Snapchat runs that up because now things get deleted. You can say things to people in pictures. You can write it as a caption, and guess what? Unless you take a screenshot, there's no evidence of it. So there's not even consequence that can be followed up on unless you get some sort of state or federal government involved. So what does this even mean for all of us? Does that mean we have to get rid of social media? No. Social media can be a good thing. Sometimes social media is benign. The big running joke when it comes to this stuff is that the internet is full of cat videos. Okay, those can be funny. Granted, I'm a little bit of a dog person, but I can see the appeal. Social media can also be a place to stay connected with people that you're not close to, at least geographically. It's a way to be able to check in on people or see where their lives are. Should we actually speak to these people? Yes. However, it's hard to ignore that places like Facebook and Instagram don't have an ability to connect people, or at least make our world more interconnected. If you want to do something about this, if you want to see the difference, I'll give you some things to be mindful of. I'm going to start with one of my favorite phrases around social media. If you're in an argument on social media, of Facebook, Instagram, probably not Snapchat, but TikTok, or anything else out there, you're getting into a heated argument where your blood pressure is rising and you feel like you need anxiety medication. Go touch grass. Go outside. Twitter isn't a real place. What's fascinating about online discourse is that when you meet people in real life, most people are kind or at least cordial. Are there bad actors? Sure. But if you were to go out to, let's say, your local supermarket, there's a good chance that people really don't care to argue that much. Now, am I saying that those that are on social media are children and they should be talked down to? No. But I do think social media brings out something inherently childish in us, where we can stamp our feet and say we believe something and have everyone else validate us. Again, that's another thing that could be taken as political. It's really not. You can go to either side of the political aisle and people will stomp their feet and say, I'm right, you don't get it. Something else to keep in mind if you want to grow out of this childish engagement is to realize that social media has been organized, it's been engineered to keep you engaged and childish. There are entire teams which create algorithms or this way that apps interact with you to keep you engaged. How do they do that? Well, sometimes happy things keep people engaged. You know what keeps most people engaged most of the time? Rage and anger. That's what keeps people most involved. And these algorithms are designed to keep you engaged with what you view the most. They even measure how long you stay on certain topics. Even if you click nothing, you're just looking at it, the algorithm will show you more of it to keep you engaged. And when you realize that these apps are designed to keep you there, not actually to help you, not to give you anything useful, you start to see some of the facade break down. Another big part of breaking out of the childishness of this whole thing is to realize that online communities don't really support you. They don't really give you anything. People have this idea, well, this is where I find my friends in my community. Really? If you had a flat tire, if you had no place to go because you had to move out of your house or apartment, how many online friends would be there to help you? Sure, some would cheer you on. Some might even start a GoFundMe if they're being really, really beneficial. But honestly, the people online aren't your friends. They might seem that way. They might give overt support. But that's because they're being childish. Think to teenagers who would say that they really, really care about a person, that might even make huge gestures. Guess what? It's shallow. They don't actually engage with one another. They don't utilize vulnerability and community. They just make grand gestures to seem like a good person. I'm not trying to downplay teenagers in their emotional engagement, but I'm just going to state the obvious because that's what it is. If you've heard all of this and now you're going to go on a campaign to shut down social media, is it bad for children? Yes. One of the most telling things about social media is a lot of the executives don't allow their kids to use it. My personal belief, no social media till you're 16. Why? Because it'll keep you about 14. And kids don't understand that Twitter isn't a real place. They see this as how the world works. There are no boundaries in terms of schools anymore, or even sometimes city or state lines. It's all one big hodgepodge. If you want to see something different, if you want to see your life change and you've recognized that social media is a big problem, look at what you view and what you engage in. Is it something you can actually do something about? People online have these huge causes that they campaign for and they argue with that they can do nothing about. People look at international conflicts and have very strong opinions. Ma'am, you work at a Wendy's. Ma'am, you're an executive for a tech firm. Sir, you don't even have an ability to go overseas. What is it that any of you think you're going to do about international conflict? Can you have an opinion? Yes. Is a raised blood pressure worth it? No. Social media is rage bait. It's how we keep people engaged, or it's at least how they do it. Now, here's what we should do with some of this. I said at the beginning, I'm going to try to not sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but some of this is going to come through. I talk about this with my clients, especially the teenage ones. If they have concerns about who they are, their identity, their anxiety, their depression, get off of social media for a month, see what happens. To me, that's the bare minimum. I would really prefer 3 because it gives someone's brain time to reset. Why would I recommend this? Because Twitter isn't a real place. Most people want to be cordial and engaged. Most people don't want to argue and see the uselessness of everything going on. However, they are childish online because in some ways, a lot of us wish we could have handled the high school cafeteria differently. That veil of protection's easy to hide behind. If you're wondering if detachment from social media is a good thing, first off, don't announce it. Don't be one of the people that says, I'm going to go find myself by checking off of social media. It's a childish thing to say. Just get off. How many people contact you? How many people are concerned about you? Maybe that online community or those people that you are really engaged with or very vehemently against don't actually care that much. They're there to bolster their emotions, to seem like they're right. And this is how social media keeps us the most childish. Every single corner of the internet, especially social media, has a way to affirm who you are, what you are, and what you believe in. And it is childish to not get challenged. It is childish to not have to engage in real life, to have responsibilities, to have a job. And so for anyone who has actually made it to the end of this and feels somewhat upset, convicted, or offended, I would encourage you to consider why. I think everybody can agree, or at least most people can agree with what I've shared today. At least on the surface, all of this sounds reasonable, but if you do feel some sort of pushback, ask yourself why. If you are seeing that social media is taking a drain on you and your mental health, start with a month. If that doesn't work, start with a couple weeks. You don't have to delete everything, just disengage from it, lock it, put it somewhere. See what happens. Find whether you actually have community or not, or if it's just online validation. See if there's really anything you can do about international conflict or climate change or anything like that, or if you just need to do the best you can with where you're at. If your mental health is in concern here, I would very much consider you coming off of social media for a time, seeing if that makes any difference. In the end, social media can be a good thing, but how it's engineered, how it's organized, how it's pushed is very childish. And I don't condone a high school cafeteria experience to drive someone's life, their decision-making, and figuring out who they are. Thank you for listening today. I hope you got something useful out of today's discussion, even though I might sound like someone who's arguing at nonsense or arguing at the internet. If you felt the need to give to this podcast, pay for the production, you can in the link below. Otherwise, I hope that you follow this podcast and share it with others so that they can find hope and healing for themselves too.